you see the waves that will carry us away? We're drifting, swept up by the tide. Our prayers in the depths will lie. Our plans resting for final fight.
Bang. Okay, there we are. What's good? What's good? I got my fancy lightings going on. I've got slightly new layout. I had to move my Streamlabs software. Like it was on the wrong hard drive, right? And so I was running out of hard drive space. So while I was at it, I decided to like upgrade things. I'm just going to use a regular Aegis-Yelmer. I've been using the diagrammic one for you guys for forever to show you all this awesome multi-layered things, and that's always a picture I can throw up there for things like that. But I'm sitting there and I'm just like, I don't got the time right now to make a cool stylized thing that, you know, is kind of a sigil that kind of expresses all that, you know, and then, you know, because I could I could create a sigil, but then I'd have to, like, impose, but, like, I can't draw it on the computer. Then I'd have to, like, take, like, some sort of a scan of it, and it probably wouldn't look that good through the scan, yada, yada, yada. So just a cool designed Aegis-Yelmer like this one, I think gets the point across. The king wears his crown, after all. So, here we are. We are gonna get started on the next Heidegger. Next, we're gonna be in, chapter or section 5, right? You know, 72, chapter 72, I guess it would be a chapter, yeah. So this is like section 5, this is like part 2, section 5, chapter 72. There's still like a part 3 that isn't out. That's been sitting around for like 80 years somewhere. But anyway, I just wanted to reiterate to anybody who hasn't caught any messages that the Tom Althouse interview will be reloaded. And I have to run with that joke. It'll be reloaded on the 16th, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern on the 16th. It'll be the three of us on the panel asking Tom questions about the Immortals and about his court case and the crimes committed against him, as well as the conspiracies revealed in the inherent execution and cover-up and damage control, right? Because, like, that's 3 levels of them fucking around. Breaking the law, stealing it, breaking the law, covering it up, and breaking the law on damage control as Tom was getting victories, which explains why a lot of Hollywood is actually breaking down, especially because it explains how, you know, where all of these film studios got particular ideas that he can legally trace back to the script of the Immortals. You know, including, like, I don't know. It might have been the very first time I mentioned it, but when he talked about, before he dropped, about the machine-like agents, I said to myself, oh, fuck, man, that's equilibrium. Everybody in equilibrium had to take a pill to fucking numb themselves. And then you had the super agents with the gun kata, and they got the cool high designer pills that also didn't affect any of their abilities, and they got training to enhance their abilities, all operating as the agency and trust of the state, etc., etc. So, these are all the cool things that are already starting to unpack. That was just 20 minutes before the fucking network and power went down, because I think it was after the hurricane for him, which damaged his area. He had power for a while, but they were probably working on the line, and he just didn't know they were going to work on the line. That's happened to me before. All right, so here we go. Temporality and historicality. History, eh? 72. Existential ontological exposition of the problem of history. All our efforts in the existential analytical serve the one aim of finding a possibility of answering the question of the meaning of being, which is... italics provide later editions. Okay, all right. Meaning of being. In general, to work out this question, we need to delimit that very phenomenon in which something like being becomes accessible, the phenomenon of the understanding of being. But this phenomenon is one that belongs to Dasein's state of being. Only after this entity has been interpreted in a way which is sufficiently primordial can we have a conception of the understanding of being, which is included in its very state of being. Only on this basis can we formulate the question of the being which is understood in this understanding, and the question of what such understanding presupposes. Even though many structures of Dasein, when taken singly, are still obscure, it seems that by casting light upon temporality as the primordial condition for the possibility of care, we have reached the primordial interpretation of Dasein which we require. We have exhibited temporality with a view to Dasein's authentic potentiality for being a whole. We have then confirmed the temporal interpretation of care by demonstrating the temporality of concernful being in the world. Our analysis of the authentic potentiality for being a whole has revealed that in care is rooted an equiprimordial connectedness of death, guilt, and conscience. Interesting. So, the authentic potentiality for being a whole has this care that is rooted in a connection to death, guilt, and conscience. I would say that our feelings about death, guilt, and conscience would inform the potentiality for being a whole. But I don't know if connectedness, I don't know if it's necessarily quote unquote connected, right? Because everything is so, it's just that we kind of use it subjectively as a litmus test to you being a whole, right? Being a whole person in that respect. Can Dasein be understood in a way that is more primordial than in the projection of its authentic existence? Although up till now we have seen no possibility of a more radical approach to the existential analytic, yet if we have regard for the preceding discussion of the ontological meaning of everydayness, a difficult consideration comes to light. Have we indeed brought the whole of Dasein as regards its authentically being a whole into the fore-having of our existential analysis? It may be that a formulation of the question as related to Dasein's totality possesses a genuinely unequivocal character ontologically. So I finally fixed the setup so that way the I can just scroll down, and as you can see, I've got the top and the bottom connect. Like, I was having that all screw me up, and now I fixed it. Anyway, I'm still getting used to the last update of Foxit Reader, which is my preferred PDF. It may be that as regards being towards the end, the question itself may even have found its answer. But death is only the end of Dasein. And taken formally, it is just one of the ends by which Dasein's totality is closed round. The other end, however, is the beginning, the birth. Only that entity which is between birth and death presents the whole which we have been seeking. Accordingly, the orientation of our analytic has so far remained one-sided in spite of all its tendencies towards a consideration of existent being a whole, and in spite of the genuineness with which authentic and inauthentic being towards death have been explicated. So, what's very interesting here is that, like, he's obviously not saying anything about the exploration of Dasein in the sense of the idea of reincarnated. But because of the analytical language in which he is putting things into the frame of reference from after you've been born and before you die, it implies the obviousness of something else before that and after that. Because otherwise, you would just say the totality of things as we would know as birth and death, right? He could have simply said it more along those lines, but he didn't. He said it in a particular framing mechanism as if it was necessary to frame something, right? Because the possibility that you were once before you were born and you will be after you were dead. But that's me reading into the situation from my point of view. Dasein has been our theme only in the way in which it exists, facing forward, as it were, leaving behind it all that has been. Not only has being towards the beginning remained unnoticed, but so too, and above all, has the way in which Dasein stretches along between birth and death. The connectedness of life in which Dasein somehow maintains itself constantly is precisely what we have overlooked in our analysis of being a whole. We have regarded temporality as the meaning of the being of Dasein's totality. Must we not now take this back, even if what we have described as the connectedness between birth and death is ontologically quite obscure? Or does temporality, as we have exhibited it, first of all give us the basis on which to provide an unequivocal direction for the existential ontological question of this connectedness? In the field of these investigations, it is perhaps already a gain when we learn not to take problems too lightly. What seems simpler than to characterize the connectedness of life between birth and death. It consists of a sequence of experiences in time. But if one makes a more penetrating study of this way of characterizing the connectedness in question, and especially on the ontological assumption behind it, the remarkable upshot is that in this sequence of experiences, what is really actual is in each case just that experience which is present at hand in the current now, while those experiences which have passed away are only coming along, either are no longer or are not yet actual. Dasein traverses the span of time granted to it between the two boundaries, and it does so in such a way that in each case it's actual only in the now, and hops, as it were, through the sequence of nows of its own time. This is very similar, actually. I'm going to go and make a woo-woo reference, because I used to listen to a lot of the lectures of Daryl Anka under the channeling of Bashar of Essassani, who I extracted a great deal of gnosis from that terminal, if you will. Bashar himself, I believe, has referred to Daryl as the channel, as a terminal. But he talks about like how all the timelines kind of work with the fracturing of of the future and the people choosing their different worlds and reality bubbles, and the Dasein is that reality bubble. It's your personal Dasein versus the Dasein of the world. And because right now the Matrix is kind of breaking itself into micro matrices based on localized concern instead of greater central concern, yet still functioning within the whole of a greater central organism, because we're still dealing with that. All the same, everything is kind of fractaling out in timelines, because, like, every second has a different potentiality within a moment to take your timeline fate in one direction or another, right? It's the difference between the next word that comes out of my mouth versus if I had chosen a different word to come out of my mouth, while in the process of explaining this to you, thus taking my and your understanding and direction of the conversation in a different direction towards different rationalized ideas, logics, states of mind, so on and so forth, right? So Bashar talks about, like, you know, how you consistently do this at, like, did he even give a number? I feel like he said like 33 frames per second or something like that, right? Because kind of basically operating off of natural principles of the illusion of perpetual motion that brings us motion picture and film, right? Where you're working off of, well, I think it's technically 20, what is it? I think it's 24 to 26 frames per second, but they do 30 frames per second for high speed, and I think there's also 60 frames per second is also very common. I don't know if it goes any higher than that, but I think that's part of the appeal of like 4 and 8K televisions, is that you could go beyond it. And there's stuff that's filmed out there that is designed to be rewatched as technology to process it gets better. Various films that like have to reduce their quality, you know, kind of like running it through a file compression, and then each time the technology upgrades, you can watch the video under the upgraded technology, and it's less compressed, right? Because of how much it can handle all of that detail, especially as it is condensed into the same period of time, right? You know, 24, 30, 60 frames, you know, other things, the aspect ratios, so on and so forth. But anyway, so my point is that this is congruent with what has been conveyed by Bashar. Thus, and thus there's a quantum aspect that he's tapping into, obviously. Thus it is said that Dasein is temporal. In spite of the constant changing of these experiences, the self maintains itself throughout with a certain self-sameness. Opinions diverge as to how that which thus persists is to be defined, and how one is to determine what relation it may possibly have to the changing experiences. The being of this perseveringly changing connectedness of experiences remains indefinite, but at bottom, whether one likes it or not, in this way of characterizing the connectedness of life, one has posited something present at hand in time through something that is obviously unthing-like. If we have regard for what we have worked out under the title of temporality as the meaning of the being of care, we find that while the ordinary interpretation of Dasein within its own limits has its justification and it's sufficient, and is sufficient, we cannot carry through a genuine ontological analysis of the way Dasein stretches along between birth and death if we take this interpretation as our clue, nor can we even fix upon such an analysis as a problem. Dasein does not exist as the sum of the momentary actualities of experiences which come along successively and disappear, nor is there a sort of framework which this succession gradually fills up. For how is such a framework to be presented at hand, where in each case only the experience one is having right now is actual, and the boundaries of the framework, the birth which is past and the death which is only coming, lack actuality? So again, he's getting into more of the weeds and the details. It's a, like you could almost look as he's picking apart these different elements with these using these words to give you a depth of richness of the of a context of meaning you can give to temporality and wholeness, and all the other things that we've been reading over at this moment, right? Like when he's talking about how it doesn't come along successively and then disappear or get built up on the other end. This is the Norns managing the tapestry of the weird, right? This is the way in which Skuld is feeding in the future to the evaluation, like Verdandi, right? Being in time is taking a Verdandi on itself. And now we're at a point where we're looking at because we're talking about history, now we're talking about Earth, right? So we did stuff about the future before. We did talk about being towards it, right? That's all Skuld, right? So there's the Norn of what should be done, what could be done. Skuld. Now we're back at Erd, right? This is Earth. This is, back to source, right? To where you came from, and that is all of the Dasein that is built up behind you. How you doing, Pearl? Okay. At bottom, even in the ordinary way of taking the connectedness of life, one does not think of this as a framework drawn tense outside of Dasein and spanning it round, but one rightly seeks this connectedness in Dasein itself. When, however, one tacitly regards regards this entity ontologically as something present at hand in time, any attempt at an ontological characterization of the being between birth and death will break down. Dasein does not fill up a track or stretch of life, one which is somehow present at hand. With the phases of its momentary actualities, it stretches itself along in such a way that its own being is constituted in advance as a stretching along, the between which relates to birth and death already lies in the being of Dasein. On the other hand, it is by no means the case that Dasein is actual in a point of time, and that apart from this, it is surrounded by the non-actuality of its birth and death. Understood existentially, birth is not and never is something past in the sense of something no longer present at hand, and death is just as far from having the kind of being of something still outstanding, not yet present at hand, but coming along. Factical Dasein exists as born, and as born it is already dying in the sense of being towards death. As long as Dasein factically exists, both the end and their between are, and they are, in the only way which is possible on the basis of Dasein's being as care, thrownness, and that being towards death, in which one either flees it or anticipates it, form a unity, and in this unity birth and death are connected in a manner characteristic of Dasein as care. Dasein is the in-between. In temporality, however, the constitutive totality of care has possible basis for its unity. Accordingly, it is within the horizon of Dasein's temporal constitution that we must approach the ontological clarification of the connectedness of life. That is to say, the stretching along, the movement, and the persistence, which are specific for Dasein. The movement, the Bewegtheit of existence, is not the motion, the Bewegung, of something present at hand. It is definable in terms of the way Dasein stretches along. The specific movement in which Dasein is stretched along and stretches itself along we call its historizing. Okay, so let's get here. All right, 3. When we get to annotation 3, I'll read that. The question of Dasein's connectedness is the ontological problem of Dasein's historizing. To lay bare the structure of historizing and the existential temporal condition of its possibility signifies that one has achieved an ontological understanding of historicality. So the getting an ontological understanding of historicality will also help us understand a lot about propaganda through history books. How much of it is malicious and how much of it is a product of the limitations of the records of everybody's experiences. If the question of historicality leads us back to these sources, then the locus of the problem of history has already been decided. This locus is not to be sought in historiology as the science of history, even if the problem of history is treated in accordance with a theory of science, not only aiming at the epistemological clarification of the historiological way of grasping things, simel, or at the logic which the concepts of historiological presentation are formed, Rickert, but doing so with an orientation towards the side of the object, then as long as the question is formulated this way, history becomes in principle accessible only as the object of a science. Thus the basic phenomenon of history, which is prior to any possible thematizing by historiology and underlies it, has been irretrievably put aside. How history can become a possible object for historiology is something that may be gathered only from the kind of being. Did I miss 3? Where was 3? Oh, 3 was up here. Dasein's self-sufficiency. Okay, so let's read this. Selbstständigkeit. Here we follow the reading of the older editions in which the hyphen comes at the end of a line. In the newer editions, the hyphen is omitted, but presumably Heidegger intends the same expanded spelling which we have already met on these pages. So, how history can become a possible object for historiology is something that may be gathered only from the kind of being which belongs to the historical form historicality and from the way it is rooted in temporality. Let me take a moment and find out where I may want to take a break. Oh, okay. We'll get to the end of chapter 72, we'll take a break, and then we'll hit 73. That's perfect. If we are to cast light on historicality itself in terms of temporality and primordially in terms of temporality, that is authentic. Then it is essential to this task that we can carry it out only by construing it phenomenologically. The existential ontological constitution of historicality has been covered up by the way Dasein's history is ordinarily interpreted. We must get a hold of it in spite of all this. The existential way of construing historicality has its definite support in the ordinary understanding of Dasein and is guided by those existential structures at which we have hitherto arrived. We shall first describe the ordinary ways in which history... We shall first describe the ordinary ways in which history is conceived so that we may give our investigation an orientation as to those items which are commonly held to be essential for history. Here it must be made plain that what is primordially considered as historical, the point of attack for expanding the ontological problem of historicality, will thus be designated. Our interpretation of Dasein's authentic potentiality for being a whole and our analysis of care as temporality, an analysis which has arisen from this interpretation, offer us the clue for construing historicality existentially. The existential projection of Dasein's historicality merely reveals what already lies enveloped in the temporalizing of temporality. In accordance with the way in which historicality is rooted in care, Dasein exists in each case as authentically or inauthentically historical. It becomes plain that Dasein's inauthentic historicality lies in that which, under the title of everydayness, we have looked upon in the existential analytic of Dasein as the horizon that is closest to us. Disclosing and interpreting belong essentially to Dasein's historizing. Out of this kind of being of the entity which exists historically, there arises the existential possibility of disclosing history explicitly and getting it in our grasp. The fact that we can make history our theme, that is to say, disclose it historiologically, is the presupposition for the possibility of the way one builds up the historical world in the humane sciences. The existential interpretation of historiology as a science aims solely at demonstrating its ontological derivation from Dasein's historicality. Only from here can we stake out the boundaries within which any theory of science that is oriented to the factical workings of science may expose itself to the accidental factors in its way of formulating questions. In analyzing the historicality of Dasein, we shall try to show that this entity is not temporal because it stands in history, but that, on the contrary, it exists historically and can so exist only because it is temporal in the very basis of its being. Nevertheless, Dasein must also be called temporal in the sense of being in time. Even without a developed historiology, factical Dasein needs and uses a calendar and a cloak. Whatever may happen to Dasein, it experiences it as happening in time, the same way the process of nature, whether living or lifeless, are encountered in time. They are within time. So while our analysis of how the time of within-timeness has its source in temporality will be deferred until the next chapter, it would be easy to put this before our discussion of the connection between historicality and temporality. The historical is ordinarily characterized with the help of the time of within-timeness. But if this ordinary characterization is to be stripped of its seeming self-evidence and exclusiveness, historicality must first be deduced purely in terms of Dasein's primordial temporality. This is demanded even by the way these are objectively connected, since, however, time as within timeness also stems from the temporality of Dasein, historicality and within timeness turns out to be equiprimordial. Thus, within its limits, the ordinary interpretation of the temporal character of history is justified. After this first characterization of the course of the ontological exposition of historicality in terms of temporality, do we still need explicit assurance that the following investigation does not rest upon a belief that the problem of history is to be solved by a coup de main? The poverty of the categorical means at our disposal and the unsureness of the primary ontological horizons becomes the more obtrusive, the more the problem of history is traced to its primordial roots. In the following study, we shall content ourselves with indicating the ontological locus of the problem of historicality. The researches of Dilthey were, for their part, pioneering work, but today's generation has not as yet made them its own. In the following analysis, the issue is solely one of furthering their adoption. Our exposition of the existential problem of historicality, an exposition which is necessarily limited moreover in that its goal is one of fundamental ontology, is divided up as follows: the ordinary understanding of history and Dasein's historizing, the basic constitution of historicality, Dasein's historicality and world history, the existential source of historiology in Dasein's historicality, the connection of the foregoing exposition of the problem of historicality and the research of Dilthey and the ideas of Count York. So he's getting into a lot of references that, like, if this was school, it would have been like, okay, next class, we'll get into this, but first we're going to do all this prerequisite homework, right? It gets like that. What's up? You saw a moose. Well, I saw a moose, but I didn't see a moose. But I'm assuming that you did, and that's why that's your name. What's up? I saw a moose. Okay, so we're going to take a break, and then we're going to hit 73. Sorry, I did that too early. All this has been super duper interesting. I've once again made some Norn connections that I like to extract when I experience the reads with this book, as we're looking at the conception of how history works as a part of your state of being. All this aspect of the past, our memory and categorizing of the past, and getting into the actual academic weeds of the concept of history itself, which I'm wondering how it'll be interesting if we see him kind of like go from the macro to microcosm, right? Because if he's going to talk about these history people, I'm assuming they're talking about people that have looked over like German history, European history, world history, right? But what about your personal history? How do you write your story of the events that happened to you? I know what I do. I like to go on YouTube and bitch about it. Okay. After all of this audio assault, we'll be right back. All right. Oh. 1 second, that's like the end of the track right there. Hold on. You know what? The tracker didn't look right, and I thought it was like that looked like it was supposed to be the tail end of the other song. Anyway, all right. You'll hear that again a little bit later. Anyway, where are we at? Kaboomskis. All right. All right. We're at 73. The ordinary understanding of history and Dasein's historizing. Our next aim is to find the right position for attacking the primordial question of the essence of history. That is to say, for construing historicality existentially. This position is designated by that which is primordially historical. We shall begin our study, therefore, by characterizing what one has in view in using the expressions history and historical. In the ordinary interpretation of Dasein, these expressions get used in several ways. Oh boy, here we go. So now we're going to get into certain kind of nuances, right? Because I think we have a comprehension that, like, there's a different context to how, you know, you've got histor-e and then historical, right? So the e versus the equal, and the equal changes the meaning of the histor. You know? And we have to it's kind of important to catch that, because somebody who's trying to deceive you by telling a half-truth will do that by, you know, it's kind of like using a qualifier word. Like we're going to get into all that, right? But it's like the qualifier word, right? It's just like, well, essentially, it's legal. What do you mean? Whoa, what's essentially? Just like, I don't like essentially. It's either legal or not, right? You know, people try to kind of sweep the qualifier word under the bus because they are trying to defer liability, creating that moment of doubt, right? And how much trust do you have, or how much risk do you need to take to go with that? Hey, what's up, violence? Violence is life. The most obvious ambiguity of the term history is one that has often been noticed, and there is nothing fuzzy about it. It evinces itself in this term may mean the historical actuality as well as the possible science of it. We shall provisionally eliminate the signification of history in the sense of a science of history, historiology. The expression history has various significations with which one has in view neither the science of history nor even history as an object, but this very entity itself, not necessarily objectified. Among such significations, that in which this entity is understood as something past may well be the preeminent usage. This signification is evinced. It's interesting, this word evinced. It's not evidenced, it's evinced. And you know what? I actually, that word is itching me. Evinced? Give me evinced in a definite. To show or demonstrate clearly, manifest. Or to conquer or to subdue. To show in a clear manner, to prove beyond any reasonable doubt. Okay, so I guess there's, evince is kind of like the upgrade from evidence. So it's like, I have evidence in a case. No. I'm going to evince this case. That makes sense. See, that's a new word I know now. Now I know the word evinced. I'm going to remember that, because that's quite something. This signification is evinced in the kind of talk in which we say that something or other already belongs to history. Oh, whoops. No. Don't close all tabs. Okay. This evinced in talk in which we say something already belongs to history. Here, past means no longer present at hand, or even still present at hand, indeed, but without having any effect on the present. Of course, the historical, as that which is past, has also the opposite signification. When we say one cannot get away from history, here by history we have in which that which is past, but which nevertheless is still having effects. Howsoever, the historical, as that which is past, is understood to be related to the present, is the sense of what is actual now and today, and to be related to it, either positively or privatively, in such a way as to have effects upon it. Thus the past has a remarkable double meaning. The past belongs irretrievably to an earlier time, it belonged to the events of that time, and in spite of that it can still be present at hand now. For instance, the remains of a Greek temple. With the temple, a bit of the past is still in the present. What we next have in mind with the term history is not so much the past in the sense of that which is past, but rather derivation, Herkunft. From such a past, anything that has a history stands in the context of a becoming. In such becoming, development is sometimes a rise, sometimes a fall. What has a history in this way can, at the same time, make such history. An epoch making, it determines a future in the present. Here, history signifies a context of events and effects, which draws on through the past, the present, and the future. On this view, the past has no special priority. That's very interesting, that it's history, but it doesn't have special priority in the past. Events means evidence. Well, I think it means like more like all the evidence. Like you saw my definition, right? Because like evidence, okay, so when I did event, let me do evidence, and let me tell you what the difference in definition is going to be. Evidence, noun, a thing or set of things helpful in informing a conclusion or judgment. Something indicative, an indication of or set of indications. The means by which an allegation may be proven, such as oral testimony, documents, or physical objects. That's evidence, right? So, evinced means, you could say, I'm going to evince you with a mountain of evidence, right? Because evince means to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. We get the two confused because we submit evidence until we've evinced the jury of who's guilty or innocent. Further, history signifies the totality of those entities which change in time, and indeed the transformation and vicissitudes of men, of human groupings, and their cultures, as distinguished from nature, which likewise operates in time. Here, what one has in view is not so much a kind of being historizing as it is that realm of entities which one distinguishes from nature by having regard for the way in which man's existence is essentially determined by spirit and culture, even though in a certain manner nature too belongs to history as thus understood. Finally, whatever has been handed down to us is as such held to be historical, whether it is something which we know historiologically or something that has been taken over as self-evident with its derivation hidden. If we take these four significations, one second before I jump into that, all right? So finally, whatever has been handed down to us is as such held to be historical. So there's the history and then the historical, right? That's the whole kind of point of the chapter, right? And so well, time is, we're calling time an illusion because we keep thinking that this reference for time operates within substance, right? Just because time is insubstantial doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We just have a really crappy relationship with it. And it's because it's not an illusion either, right? Because time still, in actuality, matters, right? I sit in a certain resonant state of being because of all the choices that I made to get myself to this state of being today, right? Various pains in my life that I had to get over the pain, right? Like, I was in a state of vitriol 2 months ago. There was an undertone of wrath in a great deal of what I was doing. I was in a more offensive demeanor. I was in a different state of being. I was like, in the midst of like some fucking like werewolf transformation, right? Like just me, wanting to fucking tear down a few fucking people that, really insulted me and I thought were have been a detriment for what was a greater promise of a certain future, right? This past, which upset me, robbed me of, made me realize of a future I was robbed of because of the poor quality of people that I was surrounding myself by, that I thought were very interested in a workable kind of goal that brought something amazing and big and important and impactful into the world that cannot be ignored or denied. Not just you doing your own fucking thing, growing your fucking tomatoes, right? Growing your tomatoes and doing your thing is an important part of it because of personal soul enrichment. But we need to be of personal soul enrichment, but we also have a big war that we are in a mere ceasefire of. It's just a mere ceasefire. You can hear them planning to make a future that you're going to have to put up a lot of energy and put up a lot of fight if you want to stay in the forefront of your world. There's 3 ways that you deal with Jormungandr. Well, there's 2 ways you deal with Jormungandr, and 1 or 2 different outcomes from that. You can either slip out of Jormungandr's clutches and also be cast out of the power that you could use from Jormungandr, because you were in Jormungandr's clutches before, but Jormungandr was not against you then. Jormungandr turned against you over circumstances that the reptilian mind didn't understand. And so, you can slip out of that, and Jormungandr will maybe chase you for a minute, but then give up, because it's got a bazillion other people it's trying to keep in its world, and you're just going to be in that outcast, and you'll have that peace from the clutches of the serpent, but you won't be able to have a greater impact, and there will continue to be a growth of a population that is devoid of your influence. And in the devoid of your influence, everything that you love about the world will be limited to just your world. And you're going to have to ignore a whole lot of shit on your conscience and pretend that you got nothing to do with it. And that's when you fall into the Satanism of being selfish. I don't want to fight the fucking world serpent. I'm going to go grow my fucking tomatoes and make pointless jokes with my friends while navel-gazing at ancient texts. Instead of putting yourself fucking forward in the world and showing the serpent that you can't crush it. Or, that it can't crush you. Excuse me. At least it can't crush you without putting up the worst of fights that also will change it. Right? Because Ragnarok, Thor wins, but then Thor dies anyway. If we take these four significations together, the upshot is that history is that specific historizing of existent Dasein, which comes to pass in time, so that the historizing which is passed in our being with one another, and which at the same time has been handed down to us, and is continuingly effective, is regarded as history, in the sense that gets emphasized. The four significations are connected in that they relate to man as the subject of events. How is the historizing character of such events to be defined? Is historizing a sequence of processes, an ever-changing emergence and disappearance of events? In what way does this historizing of history belong to Dasein? Is Dasein already factically present at hand to begin with, so that on occasion it can get into a history? Does Dasein first become historical by getting intertwined with events and circumstances? Or is the being of Dasein constituted first of all by historizing, so that anything like circumstances, events, and vicissitudes is ontologically possible, only because Dasein is historically in its being? Why is it that the function of the past gets particularly stressed when the Dasein which historizes in time is characterized temporally? If history belongs to Dasein's being, and this being is based on temporality, then it would be easy to begin the existential analysis of historicality with those characteristics of the historical which obviously have a temporal meaning. Therefore, by characterizing more precisely the remarkably privileged position of the past in the concept of history, we shall prepare the way for expounding the basic constitution of historicality. Bob Smith, no crush, all praise the serpent. Hey, I am not against the serpents, but there are some serpents that I am against. And Jormungandr does, unfortunately, have to be crushed. Because the world serpent is a Jotun. And it is a Jotun of it has a pressure. Its spirit essence has this pressure. When that pressure can give you a hug, but that pressure can go bad. It can be stirred into tension, and it can squeeze the life force out of you. And you have to understand, the reptilian mind only understands so many things. My iguana quote unquote loves me, but if I'm irritating him in just the right way, he will flinch real fast, get hissy, bite, and then I got stitches on my finger. And maybe I even lost the tip of my finger if I'm really that bad. Right? So yeah, that's an aspect of it, because many of these Jotun are susceptible to all manner of mankind's failings. Right? And that's what puts these entities in that place. The two of the three of Loki's children with Angrboda. Goddess Hel, she's technically a good guy. Right? But the other two are certain expressions of humanity. Right? I would even say, because Fenrir already we kind of understand as the collective unconscious. Right, this black wolf that consumes it all. But Jormungandr might be very well the collective ego. I mean, especially considering, if you've looked at the Aegis Ylma that I usually would have up there, Thor's realm is with Jotunheim in the east, with the ether, the expanding principles. And so Thor has to deal with Jormungandr, who is a great big Jotun, thus Jotunheim. And, that serpent is almost like the totem of the Jotuns, and the Jotuns in this respect are like primordial nature spirits. Okay. Therefore, by characterizing more precisely the remarkably privileged position of the past in the concept of history, we shall prepare the way for expounding the basic constitution of historicality. The antiquities preserved in museums, household gear, for example, belong to a time which is past, yet they are still present at hand in the present. How far is such equipment historical when it is not yet past? Is it historical? Let us say only because it has become an object of historiological interest, of antiquarian study or national lore, right? It's the idea of when does something all of a sudden you realize you're standing there and it's old. It's an old kind of tech, right? There's not a lot of things in this house currently that are like that. I just went to the dump today and I threw away an old floor waxing machine that I don't think has seen any action since the 80s. That would be kind of part of new history, right? New historical items. I went to... there's one section of the Indianapolis Museum of Art, or whatever it is, and it's like, it was all like technology and like living appliances. There was even like a small sports automobile type that was like a concept car or whatever, and all these things were like the 70s and shit, right? Like, so that's historical. You know, I mean, like, I've had this computer I've got right here. This computer, I think I've maybe had this computer for nearly 8 years. But I wouldn't say it's historical yet, despite it having been around for 8 years. My guitar amp, it's got a little bit of history there, but it's also still very present and still has a future, right? So it kind of exists in all three. Okay. Circle of life. Same with Crazy Cat Lady. Okay. I have begun to understand things like evil as that which is against ye, instead of something like Wenger from D&D. Do you know what nemesis means? Bricktop. I don't know what the bricktop means, but nemesis has a etymological relationship to Nemi, and I believe Nemi is a goddess, and there's a lake in Italy called Lake Nemi, and lore about her comes from around that lake, and is where the word nemesis comes from, is within that lore. That much I remember about the word nemesis. And then evil in D&D, right? Yeah, like, D&D is not that, like, simple. Right, like, there's that structured system, right? There's 3 evils in Dungeons and Dragons, and so it's evil, but then it's ethics, right? Because you've got lawful, chaotic, and neutral, and then you can be evil of all 3 of those kinds. So, like, I've played these games. Like, you know, chaotic evil is just, like... I saw a good opportunity to stab the guy to death and take his things, and I did. Right? That's you know, and I got intense joy out of it, so on and so forth. You know, like neutral evil is, oh, you want me to kill that guy and steal his stuff? Yeah, no problem. And then lawful evil is, by the merit of my code, by the ways of my people, I'm going to kill you and steal your stuff. That's lawful evil, right? And then they have whole societies in the game that play these out, and a talented storyteller does it right, and then you get an organic sense of it Even if you're playing a little bit off the archetypes, that's naturally going to happen because it's a sense of theater, which still has that level of authenticity if well written and directed. Such equipment can be historiological objects only because it's somehow is okay, I'm sorry. I went back up to, but I'm not down there yet either. Where was I? Things have. Shoot, where am I? I think I was over. Object. We repeat the question: by what right do we call this entity historical when it is not yet past? Or do these things have in themselves something past, even though they are still present at hand today? Then are these which are present at hand still what they are? Ultimately, for something to be historical the way that he's talking about it, the whole world has to change around it and almost kind of quote-unquote outdate it, right? Like, a car is not necessarily old because it's 20 years old. A car is old because we don't make the car like that anymore. It's more metal than plastic, right? We got all these ultra-hard plastics and polymer like fibers and all sorts of synthetic materials, that go into a car to cut down on cost and weight, keeping things safe, giving you flexibility and design choices, so on and so forth, right? So, it's just like, it's the difference. I got a 2004 Civic. 2004, right? This thing, that door will break my fucking leg if I am not careful. That door is so sensitive to imbalance that the slightest back tilt of the vehicle, it's just going to naturally swing shut. It's kind of a heavy door, right? No car has had a door that heavy in the private market like that, unless you're getting something eccentric in a long ass time. That's one element that gives it the characteristics of something historical, because nobody's used to that kind of design in a vehicle based on their experience of most vehicles, because of the march of time and progress, or just change and adaptations. And then you no longer look like everything else around you in adaptation. The me of 2021 is certainly a thing of the past. Okay, manifestly, these things have altered. The gear has become fragile or worm-eaten in the course of time. But that specific character of the past which makes it something historical does not lie in this transience. What we got here? Vergangenheit, vergehen, to pass away, and Vergangenheit, the past. And then there's a 2. We'll read that when we get to it, which is down here. Which continues even during the being present at hand of the equipment in the museum. What then is past in this equipment? What were these things which today they are no longer? They are still definite items of equipment for use, but they are out of use. Suppose, however, that they were still in use today. See, once again, this is perfect. Like I said, the heavy fucking doors on my car as just one element. There's no aux jack on the stereo. There's no USB power jack anywhere on the dashboard. Because of prior tech, prior design, there was no fit for it. It didn't even look like you could retrofit it. You'd have to do all sorts of alterations to set it up. Those are other things that put it in a more historical category. Like many a household heirloom, would they then be not yet historical? All the same, whether they are in use or out of use, they are no longer what they were. What is past nothing else than that world within which they belong to, a context of equipment, and were encountered as ready to hand and used by a concernful Dasein who was in the world. That world is no longer, but what was formerly within the world with respect to the world is still present at hand. As equipment belonging to a world, that which is now still present at hand can belong nevertheless to the past. But what do we signify by saying of a world that it is no longer? A world is only in the manner of existing Dasein, which factically is a being in the world. Let's see. Oh, that's just German. I'm not going to read that. That's my rule. If it's all German, I don't read it. I need to have there needs to be some English written into the passage. Let's see. Nemesis is retribution brought by an appropriate agent. Right, which the being in the lore that I mentioned embodies that idea. So I have a Bon Tempi organ. It's something historical. It's from the 70s, I think. Bon Tempi. Okay, never even heard of Bon Tempi. I'm lagging. Bricktop is a character in a mafia movie. Okay, gotcha. All right. Thus, the historical character of the antiquities that are still preserved is grounded in the past of that Dasein to which they belonged. Let me figure out if there's a good place to break soon. This could be a much longer chapter. Okay, look at that. Basically the same thing. So we're just going to read another, page and a half? Basically page and a half. But according to this, only past Dasein would be historical, not Dasein in the present. However, can Dasein be past at all if we define past as now, no longer either present at hand or ready to hand? Manifestly, Dasein can never be past, not because Dasein is not transient, but because it essentially can never be present at hand. Rather, if it is, it exists, a Dasein which no longer exists, however, is not past in the ontological strict sense. It is rather having been there. Gewesen. The antiquities, which are still present at hand, have a character of the past and of history by reason of the fact that they have belonged as equipment to a world that has been the world of a Dasein that has been there, and that there have been derived from the world. This Dasein is what is primarily historical. But does Dasein first become historical in that it is no longer there? Or is it not historical precisely insofar as it factically exists? Is Dasein just something that has been in the sense of having been there, or has it been as something futural, which is making present, that is to say, in the temporalizing of its temporality? From this provisional analysis of equipment which belongs to history and which is still present at hand, though somehow past, it becomes plain that such entities are historical only by reason of their belonging to the world, but the world has an historical kind of being, because it makes up an ontological attribute of Dasein. It may be shown further that when one designates a time as the past, the meaning of this is not unequivocal, but the past is manifestly distinct from one's having been there, with which we have become acquainted as something constitutive for the ecstatical unity of Dasein's temporality. This, however, only makes the enigma ultimately more acute. Why is it that the historical is determined predominantly by the past, or, to speak more appropriately, by the character of having been, when the character is one that temporalizes itself equiprimordially with the present and the future? We contend that what is primarily historical is Dasein, that which is secondarily historical. However, is what we encounter within the world, not only equipment ready to hand in the widest sense, but also the environing nature as the very soil of history. Entities other than Dasein, which are historical by reason of belonging to the world, are what we call world historical. It can be shown that the ordinary conception of world history arises precisely from our orientation to what is thus secondarily historical. World historical entities do not first get their historical character, let us say by reason of an historiological objectification. They get it rather as those entities which they are in themselves when they are encountered within the world. Whew, excuse me. Yes, thank you, Violence. Oh, I know. If you're not chit-chatting, that's A-okay. Oops, where was I? In the world. Okay. In analyzing the historical character of equipment which is still present at hand, we have not yet been led back to Dasein as that which is primarily historical. But at the same time, we have been made to doubt whether the temporal characterization of the historical in general may be oriented primarily to the being and time of anything present at hand. Because I would say that historical nature of Dasein, and contextually speaking, is that like for instance, this is the moment where I am experiencing reading, being in time in this live stream with you guys. Okay, so this is the Dasein of the present. However, this event is still happening. Right? It's an ongoing present, effectively, until I hit stop stream. And then once it's over, and if you weren't there when it was happening, then you only get the record of what was done. You weren't in the real time of me reading the passage, such as Violence is, who is letting me know that they're just listening. Why? Because they're letting me know that they are part of this Dasein. They are participating. They are not missing out, right? What's it called? FOMO, fear of missing out, or FOMO, fear of missing out, right? You had to be there, man. Fear of missing out was the number one reason for compliance in 2020 and 2021. Fear of missing out. People would rather risk what they trusted instead of missing out for their own personal benefit. Entities do not become more historical by moving off into a past which is always further and further away, so that the oldest of them would be the most authentically historical. On the other hand, if the temporal distance from now and today is of no primary constitutive significance for the historicality of entities that are authentically historical, this is not because these entities are not in time and are timeless, but because they exist temporally in so primordial a manner that nothing present at hand in time, whether passing away or still coming along, could ever by its ontological essence be temporal in such a way. It will be said that these deliberations have been rather petty. No one denies that at bottom human Dasein is the primary subject of history, and the ordinary conception of history, which we have cited, says so plainly enough. But with the thesis that Dasein is historical, one has in view not just the ontical fact that in man we are presented with a more or less important atom in the working of world history, and that he remains the plaything of circumstances and events. This thesis raises the problem to what extent, and on the basis of what ontological conditions, does historicality belong as an essential constitutive state to the subjectivity of the historical subject. Okay, we're going to do chapter 74 when I get back from break. And let me get a look ahead right now. I want to know how long 74 is. All right. Probably 74 will be the end for tonight. 3 chapters in what is no doubt going to be 2 hours, I think is going to be a perfect chunk for all of us. All right? Excelente. So, let's roll on with some more of the Atlantis Chronicles. Hold on. Kill that, and go.
Whichever way I look, there's only chaos. The sun is black, riding with fire. The ground is shaking and pressing with lava. I can recognize the land I was born. This is the death of the world. We're going dead with those children screaming. These are the final thoughts. We have been warned, they meant for you as a storm. I can't save the world I love. No real save us all. Here comes a new extension. I can't save the world I love. No real save us all. Here comes a new extension. The wave is coming for us. Brain attack, better than round gas. The wave is coming for us. The wave is gonna wipe us right. I saw an eagle fall from the sky. Followed by legions of other pride. Forgot to crumble for shelter. Saying us they flew away.
Right there. Okay. Bang. Excellent. Excellent. This has been running nice and smooth like. Okay. Bang and zoom. So here we are, chapter 74, the basic constitution of historicality. Dasein factically has its history, and it can have something of the sort because of the being of this entity is constituted by historicality. We must now justify this thesis, with the aim of expounding the ontological problem of history as an existential one. The being of Dasein has been defined as care. Care is grounded in temporality. Within the range of temporality, therefore, the kind of historizing which gives existence is definitely historical character, must be sought. Thus, the interpretation of Dasein's historicality will prove to be, at bottom, just a more concrete working out of temporality. We first revealed temporality with regard to that way of existing authentically, which we characterize as anticipatory resoluteness. How far does this imply an authentic historizing of Dasein? We have defined resoluteness as a projecting of oneself upon one's own being guilty, a projecting which is reticent and ready for anxiety. Resoluteness gains its authenticity as anticipatory resoluteness. In this, Dasein understands itself with regards to its potentiality for being, and it does so in such a manner that it will go right under the eyes of death in order thus to take over in its thrownness that entity which it is itself, and to take it over wholly. The resolute taking over of one's factical there signifies at the same time that the situation is one which has been resolved upon. In the existential analysis, we cannot, in principle, discuss what Dasein factically resolves in any particular case. Our investigation excludes even the existential projection of the factical possibilities of existence. Nevertheless, we must ask whence, in general, Dasein can draw those possibilities upon which it factually projects itself. One's anticipatory projection of oneself on that possibility of existence, which is not to be outstripped on death, guarantees only the totality and authenticity of one's resoluteness. But those possibilities of existence which have been factically disclosed are not to be gathered from death, and this is still less the case than when one's anticipation of this possibility does not signify that one is speculating about it, but signifies precisely that one is coming back to one's factical there. Will taking over the thrownness of the self into its world perhaps disclose an horizon from which existence snatches its factical possibilities away? Have we not said in addition that Dasein never comes back behind its thrownness? Before, we decided too quickly whether Dasein draws its authentic possibilities of existence from thrownness or not. We must assure ourselves that we have a full conception of thrownness as a basic attribute of care. As throne, Dasein has indeed been delivered over to itself and to its potentiality for being, but as being in the world, as throne, it has been submitted to a world and exists factically with others proximally, and for the most part the self is lost in the they. It understands itself in terms of those possibilities of existence which circulate in the average public way of interpreting Dasein today. These possibilities have mostly been made unrecognizable by ambiguity, yet they are well known to us. The authentic existential understanding is so far from extricating itself from the way of interpreting Dasein which has come down to us that in each case it is in terms of this interpretation against it, and yet again for it, that any possibility one has chosen is seized upon in one's resolution. You always have to, man, you really have to stick with a passage, with a whole paragraph in this book with Heidegger, right? Because, if you're looking at all this context and you're trying to, if you forget exactly what the focus of the paragraph is, you're just like that any possibility one has chosen is seized upon in one's resolution, right? Possibilities of what? Resolutions of what? Granted, you're technically talking about things like resolution itself, right? And we're not used to thinking so conceptually of these words that we use to describe circumstances that we're in. The resoluteness in which Dasein comes back to itself discloses current factical possibilities of authentic existing, and discloses them in terms of heritage, which that resoluteness as throne takes over. In one's coming back resolutely to one's thrownness, there is hidden a handing down to oneself of the possibilities that have come down to one, but not necessarily as having thus come down. Let's take a look. Okay, we get to read this one. Die Entschlossenheit in der das Dasein auf sich selbst zurückkommt, erschließt die jeweiligen faktischen Möglichkeiten eigentlichen Existierens aus dem Erb, das sie als geworfen übernehmen, das Eschlossen zurkommen auf die Geroffenheit birgt ein sich überliefern überkommener Möglichkeiten in sich obswer nicht notwendig als überkommener. The grammatical structure of both sentences is ambiguous. Notice all the counterpoints of the verbs zurkommen, überkommen, überliefern, übernehmen, which cannot be reproduced in translation. Interesting, right? So what he's basically saying is that a very interesting assortment of conversation had to be written down. We just didn't have like a word for those words, right? So you ultimately had to change it, right? So this was the entire passage, right? Or is this one sentence? That's like a whole passage, right? So that's like all of this. So if everything good is a heritage and the character of goodness lies in making authentic existence possible, then the handing down of a heritage constitutes itself irresoluteness. The more authentically Dasein resolves, and this means that in anticipating death it understands itself unambiguously in terms of its own most distinctive possibility, the more unequivocally does it choose and find the possibility of its existence, and the less does it do so by accident. Only by the anticipation of death is every accident a provisional possibility driven out. Only being free for death gives Dasein its goal outright and pushes existence into its finitude. Once one has grasped the finitude of one's existence, it snatches one back from the endless multiplicity of possibilities which offer themselves as closest to one, those of comfortableness, shirking, and taking things lightly, and brings Dasein into the simplicity of its fate, the Schicksals. Thus, this is how we designate Dasein's primordial historizing, which lies in authentic resoluteness, and in which Dasein hands itself down to itself free for death, in a possibility which it has inherited and yet has chosen. Dasein can be reached by the blows of fate only because in the depths of its being, Dasein is fate in the sense we have described. Existing fatefully in the resoluteness which hands itself down, Dasein has been disclosed as being in the world for the fortunate circumstances which come its way and for the cruelty of accidents. Right, it's that idea of here are the circumstances I find myself in, right? It's just like X, Y, and Z things happened. People are responsible. You are likely personally responsible in some way or shape or form. Whether you are guilty or not, you're still responsible, and you find yourself under arrest. You may even find yourself convicted, whether you're guilty or not, because of the choices you made during those experiences and the causality that occurred due to it. That'll be interesting. I can't wait for the Tom Althouse interview once again, because I'm going to wonder, like, okay, is any of the philosophical shit that they pound into you, was all of that expositional to cover for something in the script, or was any of that actually in your script, right? You know, because there's been so many philosophical lessons, good lessons to extract from people that broke down the Merovingian in the second film, talking about causality, so on and so forth. So, fate does not first arise from the clashing together of events and circumstances. Even one who is irresolute gets driven about by these, more so than one who has chosen, and yet he can have no fate. All right, let me see. Do I read that one? Yeah, we're going to read that one. Okay, much of this page is these two. Okay, so there's a lot of descriptions down here. All right. Is it? Thank you. I appreciate that. This statement may well puzzle. I mean, like none of this is conversational. These guys did a good job spelling the German out phonetically for me. with me also picking up on a thing or two of what those spellings phonetically mean. But, like, you could cast me reading a phonetic German script and I could probably play a German-speaking German awesome, right? Just give me the script in German and I'll mouth it out, and then, like, in the interviews it'll be like, I had no idea what I was saying. They do that in the episode of Family Guy where Quagmire goes to Korea, and then you find out he was like this huge TV star in Korea, had no idea what the hell he was saying throughout his entire season on the show. It was a funny premise. That's what's going on with me and the German right now, right? But what's really cool is that if it ever actually sinks in, I will easily become fluent. Because I will easily have an understanding of proper pronunciation, enunciation, and that's fun. And that's going to help my my invocations. What am I doing here? Let me just double check my dumbness. Active instant of invoking is when you feel like a higher prayer or formula, invoking and an opening of our windows. Act of conjuring up a spirit. No, I'm sorry. It's evoking. I'm evoking, because that's the inner, right? I'm still, like, ingraining which I mean when I say, and I really need to ingrain that. To call out or forth, to summon, right? I think it's the evocations is what I'm doing. That's when it's coming from within. So anyway, this statement may well puzzle the English-speaking reader, who would perhaps be less troubled if he were to read that the irresolute man can have no destiny, as we shall see in the next paragraph. Heidegger has chosen to differentiate sharply between the words Schicksal and Geschick, which are ordinarily synonyms. Thus, Schicksal, our fate, might be described as the destiny of the resolute individual. Geschick, our destiny, is rather the destiny of a larger group, or of Dasein as a member of such a group. This usage of Geschick is probably to be distinguished from that which we have met on sections 16 and 19. I forget what the H means here, so I'm just kind of giving you a verbal. And perhaps even 379, where we have preferred to translate it by vicissitude. The suggestion of an etymological connection between Schicksal and Geschick on one hand, and Geschicht, our history, and Geschehen, our historizing, on the other, which is exploited in the next paragraph, is, of course, lost in translation. All right, speaking of the next paragraph, if Dasein by anticipation lets death become powerful in itself, then as free for death, Dasein understands itself in its own superior power, the power of its finite freedom, so that in this freedom, which is only in its having chosen to make such a choice, it can take over the powerlessness of abandonment to its having done so, and can thus come to have a clear vision of the accidents of the situation that has been disclosed. Wenn das Dasein wohlhoffend den Tod in sich machtig werden lässt, verstet es sich vor ihn in der eigenen Übermacht seiner ähnlichen Freiheit in der die je nur ist ihm gefällt haben, der qual die Ohnmacht der Überlassenheit an es selbst zu übernehmen und für die Zufall der erschlossenen Situation hellsichtig zu werden. Woo! It should perhaps be pointed out that Ohnmacht can also mean a faint or a swoon, and that Hellsichtigkeit is the regular term for clairvoyance. Thus, the German reader might easily read into this passage a suggestion of the seer's mystical trance. Ooh, I love that. Ooh, that's sexy. All right. But if faithful Dasein as being in the world exists essentially in the being with others, its hysterizing is a co-hysterizing and is determinative for it as destiny, Geschick. This is how we designate the hysterizing of the community, of a people. Destiny is not something that puts itself together out of individual fate. Any more than being with one another, one can conceive as the occurring together of several subjects. Our fates have already been guided in advance in our being with one another in the same world and in our resoluteness for definite possibilities. Only in communicating and in struggling does the power of destiny become free. Dasein's fateful destiny in and with its generation goes to make up the full, authentic hysterizing of Dasein. Fate is that powerless superior power which puts itself in readiness for adversities, the power of projecting oneself upon one's own being guilty, and of doing so reticently with readiness for anxiety. As such, fate requires, as the ontological condition for its possibility, the state of being of care, that is to say, temporality, only if death, guilt, conscience, freedom, and finitude reside together equiprimordially in the being of an entity as they do in care, can that entity exist in the mode of fate, that is to say, only then can it be historically in the very depths of its existence. Only an entity which, in its being, is essentially futural, so that it is free for its death and can let itself be thrown back upon its factical there, by shattering itself against death, that is to say, only an entity which, as futural, is equiprimordially in the process of having been, can, by handing down to itself the possibility it has inherited, take over its own thrownness and be in the moment of vision for its time. Only authentic temporality, which is at the same time finite, makes possible something like fate, that is to say, authentic historicality. It is not necessary that in resoluteness one should explicitly know the origin of the possibility upon which that resoluteness projects itself. It is rather in Dasein's temporality, and there only, that there lies any possibility that the existential potentiality for being upon which it projects itself can be gleaned explicitly from the way in which Dasein has been traditionally understood. The resoluteness which comes back to itself and hands itself down then becomes the repetition of a possibility of existence that has come down to us. Repeating is handing down explicitly, that is to say, going back into the possibility of the Dasein that has been there. Okay? Die Werdenholung ist die ausdrücklich Überlieferung, dass hier der Rückgang in Möglichkeiten des Daseins. In the earlier editions, the article die, as well as the words now, italicized, appear in spaced type. This is all for one. While we usually translate Werdenholen as repeat, this English word is hardly adequate to express Heidegger's meaning. Etymologically, wiederholen means to fetch again. In modern German usage, however, this is expressed by the cognate separable verb wiederholen. While wiederholen means simply to repeat or do over again, Heidegger departs from both these meanings, as he is careful to point out. For him, wiederholen does not mean either a mere mechanical repetition of an attempt to reconstitute the physical past. It means rather an attempt to go back to the past and retrieve former possibilities, which are thus explicitly handed down or transmitted. The authentic repetition of a possibility of existence that has been the possibility that Dasein may choose its hero is grounded existentially in the anticipatory resoluteness, for it is in resoluteness that one first chooses the choice which makes one free for the struggle of loyally following in the footsteps of that which can be repeated. But when one has, by repetition, handed down to oneself a possibility that has been the Dasein that has been there is not disclosed in order to be actualized over again, the repeating of that which is possible does not bring again, wiederbringen, something that is past, nor does it bind the present back to that which has already been outstripped. Arising as it does from a resolute projection of oneself, repetition does not let itself be persuaded of something by what is past, just in order that this as something which was formerly actual may recur. Rather, the repetition makes a reciprocative rejoinder to the possibility of that existence which has been there. But when such a rejoinder is made to this possibility in a resolution, it is made in a moment of vision, and as such it is at the same time a disavowal of that which in the today is working itself out as the past. Okay, hold on a second. Die Wörterholung las sich einem Entschlossen, sich den Würfen entspringend nicht warm, verbengenden Überrenden, es als das Worbels wirklich nur wiederkehren zu lassen, die Wiederholung erwidert, veel mehr die Möglichkeit der gewissen Existenz, da Erwiderung der Möglichkeit im Entschluss ist ebensolch als augenblicklich der Widerruf dessen has in Heut sich all Vergangenheit auswirkt. The idea seems to be that in resolute repetition one is having, as it were, a conversation with the past, in which the past repurposes certain possibilities for adoption, but in which one makes a rejoinder to this proposal by reciprocating with the proposal of other possibilities as a sort of rebuke to the past, which one now disavows. The punning treatment of wieder and wider is presumably intentional. Okay? Repetition does not abandon itself to that which is past, nor does it aim at progress. In the moment of vision, authentic existence is indifferent to both these alternatives. Let's hold on a second. I just want to get a sense of, okay, we're almost there. All right. So repetition is like a ritual situation, right? Like they're talking about fate. They mentioned a hero. Specifically, the word of choice used was hero, which, etymologically is Horus. Horus is a hero god. Horus has a lot of the same qualities based on his origin story as Vidar, right? He's born as a god of vengeance in that respect. It's all about what comes forth to resist a undesirable fate. We characterize repetition as a mode of that resoluteness which hands itself down, the mode by which Dasein exists explicitly as fate. But if fate constitutes the primordial historicality of Dasein, then history has its essential importance, neither in what is past nor in the today and its connection with what is past, but in that authentic historizing, of existence which arises from Dasein's future. As a way of being for Dasein, history has its roots so essentially in the future that death as that possibility of Dasein, which we have already characterized, throws anticipatory existence back upon its factical throneness. And so, for the first time, imparts to having been its peculiarly privileged position in the historical. Authentic being towards death, that is to say, the finitude of temporality, is the hidden basis of Dasein's historicality. Dasein does not first become historical in repetition, but because it is historical as temporal. It can take itself over in its history by repeating. For this, no historiology is as yet needed. Resoluteness implies handing oneself down by anticipation to the there of the moment of vision. And this handing down we call fate. This is also the ground for destiny, by which we understand Dasein. We could say Daseinity, but anyway, history and being with others. In repetition, fateful destiny can be disclosed explicitly as bound up with the heritage which has come down to us. By repetition, Dasein first has its own history made manifest. Historizing is itself grounded existentially in the fact that Dasein as temporal is open ecstatically. So too is the disclosedness which belongs to historizing, or rather, so too is the way in which we make this disclosedness our own. That which we have hitherto been characterizing as historicality to conform with the kind of historizing which lies in anticipatory resoluteness, we now designate as Dasein's authentic historicality, from the phenomena of handing down and repeating which are rooted in the future. It has become plain why the historizing of authentic history lies preponderantly in having been, but it remains all the more enigmatic in what way this historizing as fate is to constitute the whole connectedness of Dasein from its birth to its death. How can recourse to resoluteness bring us any enlightenment? Is not each resolution just one more single experience in the sequence of the whole connectedness of our experiences? Is the connectedness of authentic historizing to consist, let us say, of an uninterpreted sequence of resolutions? Why is it that the question of how the connectedness of life is constituted finds no adequate and satisfying answer? Is not our investigation over hasty? Does it not in the end hang too much on the answer without first having tested the legitimacy of the question? Nothing is so plain from the course of the existential analytic so far as the fact that the ontology of Dasein is always falling back upon the allurements of the way in which being is ordinarily understood. The only way of encountering this fact methodologically is by studying the source of the question of how Dasein's connectedness is constituted, no matter how obvious this question may be, and by determining within what ontological horizon it moves. Last passage. If historicality belongs to the being of Dasein, then even inauthentic existing must be historical. What if it is Dasein's inauthentic historicality that has directed our questions to the connectedness of life and has blocked off our access to authentic historicality and its own peculiar connectedness? However this may be treated, we cannot do without a study of Dasein's inauthentic historicality if our exposition of the ontological problem of history is to be adequate and complete. Woo! That's it. All right. 75 will be next time. Dasein's historicality and world history. Woo! Just taking a second to breathe all that in. So that was really good. There's so much to let settle and integrate after going through all of that technical data. About the manner in which something turns into history when it goes into the characteristic of Dasein in the past. Right? Because prior to all this, we were getting a nature of what it was to be the past in Dasein and how the past emerges by temporality. And this here is now getting into basically the recall of that time that was put into record by those who had been there. Because you had to be there, man. You just had to be there. All right. That's the show. I am about to hit it, so now's your last chance to say goodbye because I'm about to go to the closing screen and call it a night. So if anybody has any final words on tonight's segment of Being in Time, wow, I got done right at 10. Ain't that special? All right. I'll see you guys on the flip side. Okay, technical difficulties. What's going on here? This was working. Why ain't this working right? Oh, I know why it's not working right. Hold on. There we go.